I was 17, and in my senior year at Lincoln High School in Pennsylvania. It was a Wednesday in late February, and honestly one of the most boring days I can remember. Fourth period was American history with Mrs. Patterson, who had this monotone voice that could put anyone to sleep. She was going on and on about the Civil War, and I remember sitting in the third row from the window, just watching the snow fall outside. My best friend Marcus sat 2 seats behind me, and we kept passing notes back and forth about the basketball game that Friday. The classroom smelled like old textbooks and that weird lemon cleaner the janitors used every morning. Mrs. Patterson was writing something on the whiteboard when the intercom crackled to life. Usually it was just the principal, Mr. Hendricks, doing afternoon announcements or calling someone down to the office. But this time the voice that came through wasn't calm or professional. It was our vice principal, Ms. Chun, and she sounded terrified. Her voice was shaking as she said all staff initiate lockdown procedures immediately. And then there was this pause before she added, "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." The entire classroom went silent. Mrs. Patterson dropped the marker she was holding, and it clattered on the floor. For a second, nobody moved. Then she ran to the door, and I heard the lock click. She turned off the lights and told everyone to get away from the windows and move to the back corner near her desk. Some kids were laughing nervously, thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. We'd done lockdown drills before, but they were always announced ahead of time, and the principal always sounded calm when he did them. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and saw Marcus doing the same thing. My hands were shaking a little as I texted my mom, just saying we're on lockdown at school. She responded immediately asking if I was okay, and I told her I didn't know what was happening. Around me, other students were whispering to each other, and a girl named Sarah who sat near the front was crying quietly. Mrs. Patterson kept shushing us and telling everyone to stay calm, but I could see her hands trembling as she pulled down the blind on the door window. We sat there in the dark corner for maybe 5 minutes, and it felt like forever. The heating system was still running, and I could hear it humming above us. Someone's stomach growled, and under normal circumstances we all would have laughed, but nobody made a sound. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy footsteps like boots on linoleum. They were moving slowly and deliberately, and I felt my chest get tight. Marcus grabbed my shoulder and squeezed hard. The footsteps stopped right outside our classroom door. I could see the shadow of someone standing there through the crack at the bottom of the door. Mrs. Patterson put her finger to her lips, and her eyes were wide. We all held our breath. Then whoever it was tried the door handle. It rattled loudly in the silence, and Sarah let out a small gasp that she tried to cover with her hand. The person outside tried the handle again, harder this time, and the whole door shook in its frame. Then a voice came from the other side. It was a man's voice, but it sounded wrong somehow. Too calm and almost sing-songy. He said, "I know you're in there," and I felt ice run through my veins. He tried the handle one more time, and then I heard him move to the next classroom door down the hall. Marcus whispered, "What the fuck is happening?" and Mrs. Patterson shot him a look, but didn't say anything. My phone buzzed, and I looked down to see a text from my older sister Emma, who had graduated 2 years ago. She sent me a link to a news alert. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. The headline said, "Armed intruder reported at Lincoln High School, police responding." I showed Marcus and watched his face go pale. I wanted to show Mrs. Patterson, but she was staring at the door like she was in a trance. We heard shouting from somewhere else in the building. It sounded like it was coming from the floor above us. Then there was a loud bang that made everyone jump. I couldn't tell if it was a door slamming or something worse. Sarah was crying harder now, and her friend Jessica had her arm around her trying to keep her quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The footsteps came back down our hallway, but this time they were faster, almost running. They passed our door, and continued toward the main stairwell at the end of the hall. Then we heard more shouting, and it sounded like multiple voices now. Someone yelled police dropped the weapon, and my whole body went rigid. There was another bang, and this time I was sure it was a gunshot. It echoed through the hallway and seemed to shake the walls. Mrs. Patterson finally moved. She pulled out her phone and called someone. I assumed it was the office or maybe 911. She was whispering frantically into the phone saying, "We're in room 4B. We heard a gunshot. We don't know where the intruder is." Her voice cracked on the last word, and that's when I realized how serious this actually was. This wasn't a drill or a false alarm. Someone was in our school with a gun, and we were trapped in this classroom. We stayed in that corner for another 40 minutes. I know because I watched every single minute pass on my phone. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The heating system kept humming, and somewhere down the hall a locker was banging open and shut in the draft like a slow heartbeat. My legs had gone numb from sitting on the hard floor with my knees pulled to my chest, but I was too scared to shift my position and make any noise. Marcus had his eyes closed, and his lips were moving slightly like he was praying. I had never seen Marcus pray before in the 4 years I had known him. Eventually, the intercom crackled again, and this time it was Mr. Hendricks. His voice sounded exhausted and shaken, but controlled. He said the situation had been contained, and that police were now inside the building escorting students out through the gymnasium exit. He told teachers to keep doors locked until an officer knocked and verbally identified himself. Mrs. Patterson exhaled so hard it almost sounded like a sob. Sarah was wiping her face with her sleeve, and even the boys who had been acting tough the whole time looked visibly relieved. When the officer finally knocked on our door and said Lincoln Police Room 4B come out single file, I felt my legs almost give out when I stood up. We walked down the hallway in a line, and I saw 2 other officers standing near the stairwell entrance. There was a section of the hallway near the science wing that had been cordoned off with yellow tape. I craned my neck trying to see what was behind it, and one of the officers told me to keep moving and look straight ahead. I did, but not before I caught a glimpse of something dark on the floor near the water fountain. I never found out for certain what it was. We were taken to the gymnasium parking lot, where parents were already lined up in their cars. My mom was there in her gray Honda, and when I got in, she grabbed my face with both hands and just looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. On the drive home, the radio was already covering the story. A man in his mid-30s had entered the school through a side door near the cafeteria that was propped open by a kitchen staff member. He had a handgun. He had fired 1 shot in the science wing hallway before being tackled by 2 police officers responding to the scene. Nobody was killed. 1 officer sustained a minor injury during the struggle. What stayed with me wasn't the gunshot, or the yellow tape, or even the shadow under our door. It was that voice. That sing-songy, too calm voice saying, "I know you're in there." I still hear it sometimes when a room goes quiet, and I can't explain why it bothers me more than anything else about that day. Like whatever that man wanted, he already knew exactly where to find it. I was in 8th grade the year our school had its lockdown, and I was one of the unlucky ones who was not inside a classroom when it happened. Every Thursday, my friend Devin and I had a free period right before lunch, which our school called enrichment time. Most kids used it to sit in the library or hang out in the cafeteria, but Devin and I always spent it in the art room at the end of the C-wing hallway, because our art teacher, Mr. Salazar, never minded us being there. And the room had these big tables where we could spread out and do our homework without anyone bothering us. That Thursday, Devin had stayed home sick, which meant I was on my own. I had just left the library and was walking down the C-wing hallway toward the art room when the lockdown alarm went off. Our school had a specific alarm for lockdown separate from the fire alarm. It was 3 short beeps followed by a long one, and it repeated on a loop. When I heard it, my first instinct was to look around for a teacher or any adult who could tell me what to do. But the C-wing hallway was completely empty in both directions. I tried the first classroom door I could reach, but it was already locked. I knocked, and I could see the shadow of someone moving inside, but nobody opened it. I tried the next one down, and same thing. The alarm kept beeping, and I could hear the distant sound of classroom doors slamming shut all around the building like dominoes falling one after another. I was completely alone in the hallway, and that realization hit me like cold water. I started walking fast toward the art room, because it was the only place I could think to go. The hallway lights were still on, which somehow made it worse. I passed the water fountain and the trophy case and the big painted mural the senior class had done last year, and everything looked completely normal, except for the fact that I was the only person in the entire corridor. My footsteps sounded impossibly loud on the floor. I was maybe 30 feet from the art room when I heard a door open somewhere behind me. Not a classroom door, a heavier door, like the exit door at the far end of the C-wing that led to the parking lot. I turned around and saw a man stepping through it. He was wearing a dark jacket and carrying something in his right hand that I couldn't immediately identify from that distance. He hadn't seen me yet. His head was turned looking back through the door. He had just come through like he was checking if anyone was following him. I did not think. My body just moved. I turned and ran the remaining 30 feet to the art room door, and I grabbed the handle, praying with everything I had that Mr. Salazar was inside. The handle turned and the door swung open, and I nearly fell inside. Mr. Salazar was standing right there like he had been about to look out into the hallway himself. He grabbed my arm and pulled me in and locked the door behind me in one motion. There were 3 other students in the room who I didn't recognize, probably seniors who also used the space during free periods. They were already sitting against the wall beneath the windows with their knees up. Mr. Salazar turned off the lights without saying a word and pointed to the wall where the others were sitting. I pressed myself against it and pulled my knees to my chest and tried to control my breathing. I whispered to Mr. Salazar that there was a man in the hallway coming in through the parking lot exit. He nodded slowly, like he already suspected something was wrong. He moved to the small rectangular window on the door and looked out into the hallway for just a second before stepping back. Whatever he saw made him take out his phone immediately. He typed something and held it up for me to read. It said, "I see him stay completely silent no matter what." The next few minutes were the longest of my life. We could hear footsteps in the hallway moving slowly past the art room door. They stopped once, and I stopped breathing entirely. One of the senior girls had her hand pressed over her mouth, and her eyes were closed. The footsteps moved on. Then we heard voices from the far end of the building. Authoritative voices. Then the sound of someone running, and a door crashing open, and then nothing. It turned out the man was a former student who had been expelled 2 years earlier. He was 19, and he had walked onto the school grounds through the parking lot exit carrying a baseball bat. According to what the principal told us later, he had come looking for a specific teacher he believed had been responsible for his expulsion. The teacher was not even in school that day. The man had made it through 2 hallways before a custodian spotted him and triggered the alarm from a wall panel. Police arrived within 4 minutes and found him in the gymnasium hallway. He was arrested without any further incident. I went back to school the next Monday and walked down the C-wing hallway, and it looked exactly the same as it always had. The trophy case, the mural, the water fountain. But I could not walk past that parking lot exit door without my chest tightening. Some places remember things even when they look completely normal. I think about that sometimes. The way a hallway can look completely ordinary and still feel like somewhere something almost happened. I want to be clear that I am not someone who scares easily. I worked night shifts at a 24-hour pharmacy for 3 years, and I have seen things that would make most people uncomfortable. Difficult situations, unstable people. moments that required me to stay calm when every instinct said otherwise. But what happened during my shift on a Tuesday night in November is something I have never been able to fully shake, and I have been trying to make sense of it ever since. It was around 11:30 at night, and the store was quiet the way it only gets in those last hours before midnight. One other employee was working with me, a woman named Diane, who handled the register while I managed the pharmacy counter in the back. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the heating unit near the front entrance clicked on and off every few minutes. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for 2 cars, mine and Diane's. A man came in around 11:40. He was wearing a gray hoodie, and he walked straight to the back of the store without looking at anything on the shelves. He stopped at the pharmacy counter and asked me for something that required a prescription, which I told him I couldn't provide without one. He didn't argue. He just stood there for a moment looking at the bottles behind me on the shelf, and then he walked back toward the front of the store. I watched him in the security mirror mounted in the corner of the ceiling. He didn't leave. He picked up a random item from an aisle and stood there holding it. About 10 minutes later, Diane called me from the register on the store phone, which we used to communicate when things were slow. She said the man was making her uncomfortable and asked if I had noticed anything. I told her what had happened at the counter, and she said he had been standing in aisle 3 for the past several minutes without moving. I told her to call the manager on duty, which was standard procedure for situations like this. Before she could do that, the store phone rang. It was our district manager calling from the regional office. Diane answered it and came back on the line with me immediately. Her voice had changed completely. She said the district office had received a call from local police asking us to initiate a soft lockdown because there was a situation in the surrounding area. She said we were not to let anyone in or out of the store until further notice, and that officers were on their way to our location. The problem was the man in aisle 3 was still inside. I came out from behind the pharmacy counter and walked toward the front of the store. The man was gone from aisle 3. Diane was standing behind the register with her arms crossed looking toward the back of the store. I asked her where he went, and she shook her head saying she didn't see him leave. I looked at the front entrance, and the door was still closed. I checked the security mirror at the front, and then the one at the back near the pharmacy. Neither showed him anywhere on the floor. There was a storage hallway at the back of the store behind the pharmacy counter that led to the staff bathroom and the rear exit. The rear exit had an alarm on it that would sound if opened from the inside. No alarm had gone off. I stood completely still in the middle of the store and listened. The heating unit clicked off. The fluorescent lights hummed. And then from somewhere in the back near the storage hallway, I heard the very slow and deliberate sound of footsteps on concrete. I grabbed Diane, and we went straight out the front entrance and stood in the parking lot in the cold until 2 police cruisers pulled in 4 minutes later. Officers swept the store and found the rear exit propped open with a cardboard box from the storage room. The man was gone. Police searched the surrounding area, but as far as I was ever told, he was never identified or located. The district office sent us both home for the rest of the night, and a note in our employee files said the incident was classified as a security breach with no confirmed threat. Diane quit 2 weeks later. I stayed for another 8 months before moving on, but I never worked a closing shift again after that night. What I keep coming back to is not knowing what that man wanted, or how long he had been in that back hallway before we noticed he was gone. The storage hallway was maybe 40 feet from where I had been standing behind the pharmacy counter for the better part of an hour. I have thought about that distance many times since. 40 feet and a humming fluorescent light between me and whatever his intentions actually were. Some nights that distance feels like nothing at all,